Delighted to welcome everyone formally to our webinar, Top Tips to Drive Customer Satisfaction. I'm Rachel from Call Centre Helper and I'll be your webinar chairperson for today. And delighted to welcome two brilliant speakers to both their first webinars with us. To Richard Kimber, the Customer Experience Coach. Welcome to today's webinar.
Thank you, Rachel. Glad to be here.
Brilliant. And for people who missed your introduction, love to kind of hear a bit more about who you are and who the Customer Experience Coach is.
Sure. So I'm a customer experience improvement specialist. I've got a background in market research, so classically trained market researcher. But the agency I worked for at the time specialised in measuring customer satisfaction and loyalty. So that's sort of where generally my background comes in, along with helping organisations currently improve customer experience through looking at the current state and then also future state design.
Brilliant. Well, welcome. And to our second speaker, Julien Rio from Ring Central. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you for having me with you here.
Brilliant. And could you give a bit of an explanation as to who Ring Central are?
Sure, absolutely. So Ring Central is a company that's all about collaborative communication. Basically, what we do is that we close the gap between internal and external communication with a strong focus on employee communication through messaging, through meetings, through PBX and so on, but also external communication, customer-facing, frontline through both voice and with a very strong focus on new digital channels such as messaging, social, and so on. So there is obviously the customer care and customer satisfaction is a huge topic for us.
Brilliant. Well, great to have you both on the webinar. Just a reminder, we are taking a recording of today's webinar, so if you want to share it with your team, it will be available later on this afternoon, normally about an hour after the webinar. So just a reminder, we've got our chat room running alongside today's webinar. It's flying at the moment, so if you want to join in the discussion, it's available on callcenterhelper.com/chat. It is in a separate window, so you do need to put them up side by side, but there's a couple of added bonuses of being in there. You can download a copy of both our speakers' slides, then it means you can follow along. There's lots of information in there, so you can download those. And also what everyone is very much looking forward to is we give away a box of chocolates or a bottle of champagne for the best tip. So you just need to write #question to ask the panel a question or #tip for a tip, and we'll pick the best tip at the end of the webinar. So as we're beginning, I want to ask our first poll, which is, when do you measure customer satisfaction? Is it during the interaction, after the interaction, within a week, within a month, or periodically ad hoc? It is a multiple choice question, so you could do multiple ones. Julien, what do you think is going to come out on this one?
I would believe that after the interaction is what most companies do today, because it gives you most of a sense of urgency, and it's still related to the interaction you just had, while the others are a little bit more disconnected, so you have more difficulty getting direct feedback.
Okay, just a few more and I'm going to close the poll. Sample size of 112. So yep, you were correct. 70% after the interaction, 28% within a week, 19% for both within a month and periodically, and 11% during the interaction. Richard, was that something that you were expecting as well?
I think broadly, yeah. After the interaction.
Well, I think now is a great opportunity to hand over the baton to you, and you can present your presentation. Oh, there we go.
Okay, just let me know that everything goes to plan, Rachel.
Yep, just need it in full screen mode.
Full screen, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
Great stuff. So again, delighted to be here, Rachel, so thanks for the invite. I'm going to talk about driving customer satisfaction and looking at some top tips. So broadly speaking, for the next sort of 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to look at or talk about three aspects. So I'm going to look at the current challenge about driving satisfaction. Then I'm going to look at very briefly the 5 dimensions, of which we're going to take one of those dimensions forward and look at that in a lot more detail, which is the number 3 there on the screen, the insight and analytics piece. And then we're going to walk through a series of top tips, looking at everything from a marginal gains approach down to peak end rule and communication. So without further ado, let's get started. So the current challenge then, broadly speaking, and I didn't want to be a scaremonger about bringing this up, but I did want to address what is largely the elephant in the room. If we're going to improve customer experience and drive customer satisfaction, we have to acknowledge, in my view personally, that it's not the easiest thing to do. It's problematic. Sometimes we take actions and do things that we think are going to have an effect, and they tend not to, or we can't determine there's a correlation between an activity and an uplift in customer satisfaction, or adversely a decrease. It's multidimensional, and I'm going to share another slide about that next. So just to explain what I mean by that, it's definitely multi-stakeholder. My personal view is that customer satisfaction is everybody's responsibility in the organisation. It's not just, or shouldn't just be left to frontline staff. So that means that when we look at programmes of activity, they need to be cross-functional, they need to be horizontal and vertical, and they need to involve as many people as possible. I think there also needs to be an acknowledgement that there's a real need for focus and a laser beam versus a shotgun approach. There's a need for significant effort and significant resource, and I don't think shying away from that is going to do anybody any favours. There also needs to be a clear strategy and a plan, but a clear strategy and a plan that can also pivot and change direction when it needs to, so a degree of flexibility in case the business environment changes internally or the environment changes externally. And then just as a final point to finish off on here, there needs to be consistency at all levels, and I think this is one of the most difficult pieces for organisations to grasp. I think within all of us there's a magpie. We all like shiny new things and we all get a little bit bored after a while, but it's real consistency that drives increases in customer satisfaction, and it's day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, that sort of type of consistency. So one of the things I've just alluded to is the 5 dimensions, and what I mean by this is that in terms of driving improvements in customer satisfaction and improvements in the customer experience, activity needs to be addressed in all these 5 areas. And I think this is the bit where organisations get a bit scared, because there's a lot to do, and in some respects there is, but it's then about, so how do we prioritise what it is we're going to take forward? So there's always something related to people, and arguably people are the single most important thing about driving customer satisfaction, and that might be about training, development, it might be coaching, anything that helps employees be empowered to improve customer satisfaction. Invariably, improving customer satisfaction, there is always going to be something that's process related, whether it's re-engineering, whether it's just reshaping slightly, whether it's improving process to boost customer satisfaction. There is always something around technology, and to Julien's piece that we're going to hear about in a minute, that's his area of expertise, but increasingly use and the advent of technology to help drive customer satisfaction and also understand customer satisfaction is only going to increase, and we've seen a massive shift in utilization and adoption certainly over the last 5 to 10 years. In terms of ways of working, as the other dimension, there is increasingly conversations about the future of work, how that's going to be. Certainly in the next 5 years, it's not going to be the same as it was in the last 5 years. And there's a lot of talk about flexible working, which is liberated by sort of technology and all that sort of good stuff. So there's invariably activities to look at around ways of working to help drive customer satisfaction. And then the 5th dimension, which is the one we're going to look at in a little bit more detail now, is around insight and analytics. And again, that's very strongly linked to technology, data, and all that sort of good stuff. So looking at top tips for insight and analytics then to drive customer satisfaction. The first one that I wanted to talk about is what I call, or what's called a marginal gains approach, and I can't take any credit for this. This is an approach adopted by Sir Dave Brailsford of Team GB Cycling and also Team Sky, and his view is very much of that you want to look to lots of marginal gains for improvement. So you want 10 things at 1% each, rather than one thing at 10% each. And probably I'd argue that organisations have already ticked those boxes of big improvements. Certainly if you're an organisation that scores on average a 5 out of 10, then there probably are some big gains that you can make. If you're an organisation that's scoring more a 7 or an 8 or a 9 out of 10, then it is absolutely going to be about marginal gains. And the other thing just to note as well is that the satisfaction improvement curve is exponential. So again, just to reinforce, the further up the curve you are, the harder it is to improve. And again, it's not setting unrealistic expectations. It's about being pragmatic and practical about what's possible over, you know, a 3-month, 6-month, 12-month period in terms of improvement. So marginal gains is definitely the first approach I'd take. The second two, or second and third one, and for me, this is the foundation, one of the foundation stones of driving customer satisfaction. So end-to-end customer journey mapping, key stages and touch points, as long as the channel of interaction. And this is an example for a manufacturer that I'd privileged to work with. And it's great for a couple of things. One is visibly, you can see the end-to-end customer journey, you know, and sharing that around the organization, as I'm going to talk about communication later on, is a really important point. So visibly understanding it. And then also seeing exactly the journey the customer does take. And that, in reality, it may be different to what's perceived internally in an organization. So having it in one place, visibly displayed, visibly documented, is a fantastic foundation for driving customer satisfaction. The other point on this slide is around creating customer personas. So really trying to get under the skin of understanding who our customers are, so that we can start to customize, personalize the customer experience with a view to improving and driving that customer satisfaction higher. And again, also understanding, you know, influences, motivations, what they need, what they want from you as an organization, in addition to potential problems and pain points that they might have as well. And again, that starts to get into the area of insight where we can identify quick wins, longer term strategies for driving customer satisfaction. So just building on that as a foundation stone, what you can also do with customer journey mapping is you can overlay 2 additional things here. So the top piece of this slide is around mapping the customer's emotional journey, and it's really quite important to understand that as well. So again, taking the key stages across the top, in this example from awareness of a business through to repairs, and understanding at each key stage, how does the customer feel emotionally? What's their experience like? And it could be anything, as we see in this example, from negative, and clearly product B here is having some challenges compared to product A. So from negative to neutral to positive, and ideally from an improvement perspective, what we want to be trying to do is eliminate the negative experiences, or to at least neutralize them, and to try and push the neutral experiences into a positive experience. So the second measure on this overlay on the customer journey is the amount of effort a customer has to go through to get what they want, whether that be purchase a product or experience a service. And again, what we're trying to get is as frictionless as possible an experience for the customer, which is related to driving customer satisfaction higher. So ideally, we're looking for low effort where that exists in the journey. If it can't be low effort, we're looking at some sort of measure around medium effort. And in the worst case scenario, again, as we've related and we see here in relation to product B, customers are having to go through a high effort. So identifying effort and emotion at each key stage in the customer journey is going to help you target areas of improvement to drive customer satisfaction higher. Again, just sticking with the customer journey as a foundation for a minute. In addition to that, there are also what I call 3 voices of insight. Voice of customer, voice of process, voice of employee. Voice of customer is exactly as it sounds. Any anecdotal feedback from customers, whether it be structured, unstructured, whether it be survey data, whether it be complaints, account queries, anything like that, to reflect what the customer is thinking and feeling at any given point in the journey. So that's voice of customer. Voice of process, again, it's pretty much as it sounds. Process is invariably handover between individuals, and the individuals might be in the same team, or individuals might be in different teams, and the process will hand over between people. What you want to do is be able to understand when that process hands over, how effective and efficient is that handover. And the analogy I like to use here is if you think about a relay race, a running relay race, where runners are handing the baton over between runner 1, 2, 3, 4. So what you want to do is have a process measure wrapped around that handover point. So if the handover fails, or it isn't efficient, or it isn't effective enough, that you can understand that it's happened, and that you can start to try and mitigate impact to business and impact to customer. In the worst case scenario is there is no measure around the process. Somebody metaphorically drops the baton and it's the customer that lets the organisation know. That's not an ideal scenario. You want to really think about process measures, being able to detect and ideally predict when that baton is going to be dropped, ideally. And then the final voice is voice of employee, which is exactly, again, as it sounds, it's not what I would call an engagement measure. It's not a retention measure of employee satisfaction. This is any feedback from the employees that interact in the process to deliver the customer experience at any point in the journey. And again, what you can do is once you've identified what you currently measure across any of the three voices, you can overlay it onto the customer journey map, which is what we've done here. So we can see there's just one point in time where there's a voice of customer measure, which comes after order dispatch. There are sort of 5 existing voice of process measures. And again, so for example, in this example, there are lots of account setup measures at the beginning. So you can see an account's been set up, you can see whether it's been activated, you can see how frequently it's been accessed. So those are the sorts of measures I'm talking about around voice of process. And then voice of employee, actually, in this example, spans the whole of the customer journey. So there's voice of employee feedback on every element. So that's the 3 voices of insight. Coincidentally, there's also the 3 A's of measurement, and it is a pure coincidence. And this relates to any measure. It's not just a customer-related measure like customer satisfaction or net promoter or customer effort. This should also apply, in my view, to any KPI that exists in a business, so any key performance indicator. And any measure, in my view, should be actionable, it should be accessible, and it should be auditable. And what I mean by that is, in terms of actionable, if I collect some data and I understand whether it's a KPI or whether it's a customer satisfaction measure, can I do something about it as either an individual, as an organisation? Having worked in research for a number of years, what you tend to find is that research is always interesting, but it can't always answer the so what question. And if you can't answer the so what question, it's probably a measure that I would call a vanity measure, which either makes you feel good or you can't do anything about it. It just makes us look good. So actionability is a really key point. And the first A. The second A is accessible or accessibility. That means that if somebody sends me a dashboard or a report, I should be able to, within a few seconds, understand exactly what it's telling me. I've seen a lot of dashboards which are not on a page, that are multiple pages, and are really difficult to interpret. For me, that's not accessible data. It's got to be easy to understand, easy to read, easy to interpret, so that, again, I can take some action as a result of that. And then the third A is auditable. I've got to be able to understand where's the data come from. More importantly, can I trust it? I've been privy to a lot of conversations at board level where the conversation has gone along the lines of, well, we've got multiple systems and we've got multiple sources of data and we don't really have a clear view or a single view of the truth. So I don't think I can trust that data, which means I can't take action on it. And that's just not a great scenario. And it also means that you shouldn't really be locking data away in an organisation. It should be, anybody should have access to it, obviously within reason, as long as it's not commercially sensitive. But the auditable aspect is really, really important. You've got to be able to trust the data that you're using on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. Just in relation to customer satisfaction, one of the things that I'd like to draw attention to, I still see it today, is that organisations tend to measure customer satisfaction, which is a absolutely great thing to do and worthwhile thing to do. Not every organisation measures and understands importance. And there's a couple of downsides to that. One is that it's really difficult to prioritise what to improve because there's not an understanding of importance from a customer's perspective, and it is or should be from a customer's perspective. So that's the first thing. Secondly, by measuring importance, as you can visually see here, you can overlay the 2 measures. You can overlay importance and satisfaction, and that enables you to do a third thing, which is produce these gaps or gap analysis on the right hand side, which are the bars in black. That shows you whether satisfaction is leading importance, which means as a customer I'm more satisfied than I need to be, or conversely, does satisfaction lag importance? So for example, if you look at the 2 bars at the bottom, satisfaction lags importance quite significantly, and then that starts to give you an ability to prioritize what to address. So it's definitely addressing the where satisfaction lags importance. So measuring importance is a really important thing, ironically. and then overlaying the two to get you to produce the gaps on the right hand side. Linked to measuring satisfaction importance is what I would call givens versus drivers of satisfaction. So again, the analogy I'd use here, and hopefully most people can relate to it, is if I want to pick a restaurant to go out for a meal, I probably am going to pick the restaurant on menu, recommendation or referral, possibly location, possibly price, value for money, ease of access, can I park, is it, you know, all that sort of good stuff. Invariably, we don't tend to pick a restaurant based on the fact that the plates are clean and the toilets are clean. But if they're not correct, those two things, then I'm probably going to be more likely to be dissatisfied. So plates and toilets are what I would call givens. So they can only be correct. They can't be more than correct, and certainly don't drive up satisfaction, but they can definitely drive down satisfaction and make customers become dissatisfied. Elements like price, value for money, friendliness of staff, helpfulness of staff, they tend to be the aspects that drive satisfaction. So again, it's really important to try and determine in your organisation, if you measure customer satisfaction, what are the things that are drivers of satisfaction, what are the things that are givens. Just to finish off on a couple of points, or a couple of tips for driving satisfaction. The first one here is what's known as the peak end rule. So this was determined by Nobel Prize winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman a number of years ago through a piece of medical research that he was doing. And he concluded that as human beings, we record experiences in two ways. One is the peak of the experience, and the peak can be either high or low, and also the end of an experience, so what it's like right at the end. And the point of me sharing this with you guys is that if you're going to do anything with a customer at any point or any interaction, it's to send them away happy, because that's an overriding way that we record experience. So peak end rule, at its peak and at its end. So definitely, you know, sending customers away happy is a really good tip. And then just to finish up, really, like him or loathe him, Richard Branson, I find myself coming back to this quote repeatedly, and I think he sort of nails it on the head. You know, customer satisfaction is about attention to detail and communication, neither of which are difficult. So they're the first things we forget. And when he talks about communication, when I talk about communication, it's internally and externally. So sharing customer satisfaction, sharing customer feedback with colleagues and teams across the organisation is a great thing and not to be underestimated. But also sharing it externally with customers. You know, if a customer's taken part in a survey, they've given up their time, you know, and effort to give you some feedback, and customers like to do that. They also like to know what you're going to do with it. And that's a really important point. So thank you very much for listening today. Thank you for your time. Please reach out and connect with me. My contact details are there, the email, mobile, or on LinkedIn and Twitter. And any questions? So over to you, Rachel.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Richard. A lot of information there and a lot of brilliant points. Yeah, we've certainly got some questions and some opinions coming in. So I'll share those with you both. So we've had an opinion which says, we've already started customer journey mapping and creating personas. It's very valuable to eliminate pain points in service journeys, considering the customer view, not company view, to align the scripts, add tone of voice, considering the personas. So Richard, I'm guessing you're pleased to hear that one? Yeah,
that's great. Absolutely great approach. Yep.
Fab. So we've had a question from Marco who said, how do you measure the voice of process? It's the first time I'm hearing this. So Richard, over to you.
Okay, so are we going to do another 20-minute webinar on this one, Rachel?
Yeah. Short and sweet.
Okay, so voice of process, you can substitute voice of process for KPIs, in effect. So key performance indicators. So you probably have in your business at the moment key performance indicators that will tell you if a process has worked, is it working, or more importantly, if it's failed. And it's the failure we want to try and catch and eliminate, because that's the bit that drives dissatisfaction and probably adversely impacts the business, either in time, cost, definitely cost, and rework. So when I talk about voice of process, I'm talking about KPIs, but I'm talking about KPIs that are linked to those handover points in the customer journey where if it goes wrong, it's going to create a real significant issue.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much. So we've had a tip sent in from Jess, who said include survey links on the email signatures to allow the customer, internal or external, to rate the level of service that they receive. Julien, what do you think of that tip?
I think it never hurts to give more possibilities for customers to voice out and give their feedback. I think that's less effective than a direct survey being sent immediately after an interaction and asking for immediate feedback. That's really what you should be doing. But once again, it doesn't hurt having additional ways for customers to voice out.
Yeah. So Amy's given in a tip which says, if you give your advisors autonomy to solve the customer's problems firsthand and not have to escalate further up the ladder, this will give the customers a feel of accountability from one person and resolve their issues first time. Therefore, even if the customer has a problem, the journey will hopefully be swift and smooth, resulting in a satisfied customer. Richard, I think that one's a great one.
Absolutely, but no, I completely agree. It's disappointing that you don't see it that often, that degree of autonomy, for whatever reason. There are a number of reasons behind it, but yeah, spot on. That's spot on.
So Paris has said, regularly compare customer feedback to your quality monitoring requirements to make sure that what you look for as good service from your teams is reflective of what your customers want. So Sarah's asked a question saying, how do you measure customer effort and emotions during the journey? Is this via customer satisfaction surveys or other methods? Richard, I don't know whether you wanted to answer this one.
Yeah, sure, and I'm sure Julian's got a view on this as well. Yeah, it's a one question as an option, or it's included on a customer satisfaction or as part of a customer satisfaction measure. And the only thing I'd stress to watch out for is normally the rating scale is the other way around. So 10 being high in terms of customer satisfaction, with effort, it's normally done the other way around. And you just have to be careful not to confuse customers, because they just go, oh, yeah, 10, 10, 10, 10, and they score an effort score the other way around. So it's just one thing to bear in mind in terms of the mechanics of actually doing the measure.
Yeah. And Julien, do you have an answer for this one as well?
Well, sure, I do. There are actually two things you need to look at. There is what customers tell you, but always bear in mind that a customer who speaks is usually either a customer who is disappointed or is extremely satisfied and want to take some of his time to give feedback. Usually neutral customers are way more difficult to get feedback from. But the second thing you should be looking at is also try to categorize what customers are saying, because it's a great way to analyze pain points. And you need to do this across channels, meaning that if you see that, I don't know, 50% of what your customers are saying is always about that specific page on your website or that specific delivery type of issue, then you know that's where you need to put some of your focus. So it's not just about the direct feedback they give you, but it's also about looking at the global volume of messages and trying to figure out what it's all about.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've had a tip in from Barry, who says, focus on improving the advisor experience. If you find ways to make your team happy, that positivity will be felt by the customer on the other end of the line. So Keith said, the most important people in your organisation are your customers and those people who speak to your customers. Make sure you constantly pull insight from them directly, rather than a CSAT measurement that only gets response from 5% of the customers. Richard, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it's what I alluded to, Rachel. It's looking at or making sure you measure across the three voices and not just customer, but including employee, because invariably the employees have got the answers. They know what they need to fix. They know what needs to be done to improve the customer experience. So yeah, across the three voices, absolutely. Great point, Keith.
Fine, thank you. So Nicholas has said, my recommendation would be to call customers proactively. Don't wait for them to contact you, as that's too late. Susie said, train team leaders, not team managers. Facilitate leadership sessions to train your team leaders to understand leadership styles, behaviours, decisions and reputations. This helps them improve advisor performance and consequently customer satisfaction. So we've got a last tip in from Barry, who says, allow the team to listen to and score their own calls. I encourage my team to listen and score them. This gives advisors the opportunity to identify their own areas of improvement with customer satisfaction. Julien, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, well, that requires some extra time. That's something great to put in place, but it's not something easy to set up because it requires them to give some extra time to reflect on performance and give feedback. So you need to have a team that is open to this kind of feedback, and it's all about communication within the team. As soon as you can get to that level of communication where everyone can talk with everyone, and where the customer is put back at the heart of the business, then you can start looking into this kind of tools and processes.
Brilliant, thanks for that. So we'll be coming back to our tips and everything later. Just remember that you can put them in to the chat room and that there's a bottle of champagne or box of chocolates available for the winner. So delighted to hand over to Julien Rio for his presentation.
All right, is it working?
It is, yes, you can see it.
Lots of pressure with all the tips received by Richard just now, so I'm gonna try my best here. So thank you very much again for having me here. What I'm gonna be sharing with you guys is more on the kind of top tips to drive customer satisfaction. And to start talking about this, what I'm gonna start with is try to analyze what is the situation today. And the first thing I'd like to do is to get everyone's feedback on what kind of channels are you using daily for communicating with your peers, with your families, with your friends, and so on. If you can help me launch the poll, I'd love to get feedback.
Sure. So the question is, do you use any of these channels daily? Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, SMS, iMessage, Twitter, and Facebook. So it's multiple choice. Julien, what do you think is going to come out kind of top?
Well, it actually really depends on where the audience is coming from. WhatsApp is very hot in Europe, but so is Facebook Messenger. Facebook and Twitter, it really depends on the age and the background of the audience. And SMS is working pretty much everywhere anyway. So it really depends on where people are coming from, I assume.
So I will close that and share the results. So yeah, quite a split. 67% saying Facebook, 61% saying WhatsApp, 57% saying SMS, iMessage, 43% saying Facebook Messenger, and 29% Twitter. Was that something that you were expecting?
To have a pretty good split, yeah, I would expect that. I actually expected Twitter to be a little higher, but I guess it's less hot than it used to be a few years back.
So I will hide that poll, and yep, you can bring your presentation back up. Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, great. So what I wanted to highlight from this initial question is just that our habits, our communication habits as consumers, because we are all consumers here, have shifted. And because of this shift in terms of communications, then we need to adapt to those new expectations that come with it. So based on that first statement, I'd like to highlight 5 different obstacles on the road to customer satisfaction and try to give you some keys, some hints on what you can do to really reach a higher level of customer satisfaction. The first obstacle is very much about the fact that now we are all becoming more and more digital. I'm giving you a few statistics that are interesting here, but overall, what's important is you've seen from the poll we just pulled right now is all of us are basically using digital channels on a daily basis for personal needs. And because we use these digital channels, regardless of our age or background, it's incredibly important that companies understand the need for being more digital and for engaging with their customers through digital channels. Here I'm telling you that 80% of adults are using messaging apps on a daily basis. If you look at teenagers, we actually reached 91%. 67% of people expect to use messaging apps to talk to businesses simply because it's way more convenient, because you can just, it's asynchronous, meaning you can send a message on your own agenda. You don't need the other person on the other side of the line to be available at the time. You move on, you do your things, you come back, you have a response, and you continue the conversation. So all these new channels are just convenient for us as consumers, and that's why we tend to want businesses to adapt and start making themselves available through these channels as well. And when we look at communication preferences from consumers today, we see that phone and email are still incredibly important. So what I'm saying, my message here today is not give up your phone and give up your email. You still need that. It's incredibly important. But in the same time, because your customers are using texting, messaging, social on a daily basis for their private conversations, they actually expect that they should be able to use the same channels to reach out to you as a company and engage in a conversation. Now, saying do that is easy. It's not that easy to actually make it happen. And it's important to understand that it's not about being on every single channel. It's about understanding your customer and trying to find out what are your customers using on a daily basis. Should I be on Twitter? Should I be on iMessage? Should I make myself available through WhatsApp or on Google My Business? It really depends on your line of business. It really depends on who your customers are and what they look for. But it's important once you have identified this to make your company available on these different channels. Then I'll move on to obstacle number 2. Obstacle number 2 is about the fact that in the physical world, we all have a single identity. But as soon as you move to the digital world, the rules change, because you could be, if you're John Doe in the physical world, you could be johndoe@gmail.com through email, you could be @JohnDoe on Twitter, maybe on Instagram you're called Pink Unicorn or whatever else. And because we have all this multiple digital identities, it makes it very difficult for companies to try to understand who they are talking to. The problem with this is that if you don't know who you're talking to, then you will build frustration for your customers. 89% of them are feeling frustrated to have to repeat over and over again their question and their problem. 72% of consumers are saying that 72% of your customers are saying that they expect the customer service representative to know who they are when they start engaging with a brand. And we all have this experience where we have to explain ourselves multiple times. We're being transferred from one agent to the other, and that's very frustrating. Now, if you can figure this out, then you're going to reduce customer frustration from once, but you're also going to improve productivity for your agents because they no longer need to ask this kind of redundant questions. Now, that's, once again, something easy to say, more difficult to do because we have all these different digital identities in the digital world. So you need to find a way to map out who your customers are and remember this and kind of build all conversation into one thread so that whether I contact you through Facebook or Twitter or Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp or whatever else, you should be able to know who I am and not ask me to repeat over and over again who I am, what I want, where I'm coming from, what is my background. Once you figure this out, you're going to solve a huge amount of frustrations from the customers. Then I move to obstacle number 3. So obstacle number 3 is about the fact that within a contact center, teams are being organized in silos. What that means, and it makes complete sense, what that means is, if you look back, we used to do customer service through phone exclusively. So we had a solution, we had a team around it, we had KPIs, we had trainings and everything. Then email and contact forms came along. So we started to get some new tools, build some new teams, have some new KPIs, some new trainings. Then live chat came in, and once again, we built teams and so on. Then social media, now messaging, and there are so many channels out there, and every time we have a new channel that we onboard within the contact center, we tend to build a new different silo. That makes sense from a historical point of view, but that's actually building a lot of frustration from your customer's perspective, because 58% of your customers actually expect to have a consistent customer experience across all channels. They don't understand why the experience is different from one channel to the other. And you need to keep in mind that a dissatisfied customer is going to contact you on average through 3 different channels. Could be, I'm going to send you a message through Twitter, and I'm going to call you through your hotline, and I'm going to send you an email, because I expect that one of the 3 channels is just going to be faster than the others for me to get an answer. But if my experience is very different through the 3 different channels, then that's going to build frustration. And 41% of customer experience professionals are actually claiming that these silos are a major barrier to customer satisfaction. And once again, it makes sense. So how do we get rid of those silos, and how do we improve productivity on one side, but especially customer satisfaction on the other side? That happens when you try to figure out how to be channel agnostic. What I was saying earlier is, you need to have multiple channels. You need to have the right channels for your customers, and that could be phone, that could be SMS, that could be email, that could be messaging apps. But what's even more important is once you have these channels in place, you need to find a way to satisfy your customers the same way and have the same service of experience, the same level of experience, same level of service across all these different channels, so that they know that they don't need to think about what channel is the most suitable to reach out to you. They should be thinking about what channel makes more sense for them as customers to engage with your company. So once you become channel agnostic and you treat every incoming message as a customer issue you need to solve and not as a message coming from Facebook or a message coming by email, once you become more customer-centric and less problem-centric, less channel-centric, then you start satisfying customers the same way across all channels. And that brings me to obstacle number 4. Even if you've done everything we said so far, there is a major issue, which is that tools are usually disconnected within a contact center. For the same reason I was bringing up earlier, in average, a contact center uses between 8 and 12 different tools. And I invite you to look at your own contact center and try to count how many different tools you're using. You're definitely going to have a solution for voice. You might have a solution for email. You might have a different one for social media, but you also have a solution for your CRM, and many companies are actually using multiple CRMs. You might have your ERP, you might have your BI, you might have your BPM, maybe you have a few chatbots, maybe you have some kind of internal website and some other platforms you need to deal with. Overall, each contact center is dealing with multiple tools, which is not a bad thing. It can be very important, and you probably need each and every one of these tools. The problem is, if your tools are not properly connected to one another, then the information doesn't flow, and you end up with redundant information, obsolete information, or even worse, you might end up with a complete lack of information. And this holy 360-degree customer view that everyone is talking about is just not something you can have if your tools are not connected. Now, 42% of customer service agents are just unable to efficiently resolve your customer's issue because of disconnected tools, because they can't have the full picture, they don't have fast conversation across channels and everything. So you need to find ways to connect these tools. And as soon as you find solutions to really connect whatever tools you have, does not matter, every company is different, but you need to have all of them, and you need to find ways to connect them together, to have the information flow from one tool to the other, so that you have this big picture that is so important for satisfying customers. And I'm going to end with a 5th obstacle, which is about choosing the right KPIs. Satisfying customers is great, and if you do everything I've told you earlier, you're probably going to be able to satisfy your customers, but you wouldn't know if you don't pick the right KPIs for doing that. 64% of companies are using Net Promoter Score as a major KPI for customer satisfaction. And we've been talking about it a bit earlier. That's a great type of KPIs, but is it the right one for your company? And 80% of customers who have changed supplier due to unsatisfactory service would not have done so if their problem had been solved upon first contact. And where I'm leading here is, one of the major metrics you need to consider for customer satisfaction, I believe, is FCR, First Contact Resolution. NPS, super important, even though NPS does not tell you much information about your industry or anything, is really just about your own improvement over time. You can hardly compare it to anything except compare to your own previous NPS. CSAT, obviously super important, but what matters most is the First Contact Resolution. And the reason why First Contact Resolution is so important is because if you are able to solve a customer problem from the very first conversation, it means that the customer won't need to come back to ask the same question again. So you're going to reduce his frustration, increases customer satisfaction, but it also means that from a productivity perspective, you will reduce the overall volume of messages you're receiving, because customers are not going to come back over and over again to solve the same problem. So in average, when you manage to track your FCR, then you can give yourself goals, and you need to know that every time you increase your FCR by 1%, you're going to increase customer satisfaction. Once again, they don't need to come back, but you're also going to increase your opportunities of cross-sell and upsell, because you put your customer in a position where he has less frustration, is more willing to listen to what else you have to sell. You're going to increase Agent satisfaction, we don't talk about it much, but it's so important to increase agent satisfaction, to reduce turnover, but also to improve productivity, because an agent that is satisfied will be more willing to help your customers. And at the end of the day, you also reduce your operational costs, because as I said, if customers don't come back for the same issue over and over again, they will be, you will have less volume and then less operational cost. Just want to take one last minute to summarize everything I've been sharing in the past 14 minutes. So first thing is engage with your customers on their favorite channels. It's not about being on every channel that exists. It's not about giving up on your phone or emails. It's about finding out what your customers want, making yourself available there. Second, you have to identify your customers to reduce frustration. We all have multiple digital identities. You need to know who you're talking to so that you don't ask redundant questions, so that you don't frustrate customers. You also need to organize your team by skills rather than channels. The channel does not matter at the end of the day. Satisfying your customer is the only thing that matters. So you need to organize your teams around this kind of KPIs, this kind of customer-centric processes. Fourth, you have to offer a consistent customer experience across all channels, because chances are your customers are going to come to you and engage with you through multiple channels. So you have to have the same level of service across all channels, the same type of experience. And to end with this, the last takeaway I'd like you to take from this presentation is you have to choose the right KPIs. FCR is a super important one. NPS works well. CSAT is great. Find out what makes sense for your company. Keep in mind the 3 A's mentioned by Richard earlier, and use these KPIs to track it over time. Don't change KPIs every second week. Keep the right one and keep improving based on this over time. Happy to take any question after this, and happy to engage through Twitter, LinkedIn. Please visit RingCentral. Happy to give you guys some more information.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Julien. A lot of information coming through. So we are going to put up a poll and say, would you like to see a demonstration of the RingCentral solution? So I will put that one up now. And while we're going, while people are voting for that, Julien, we've had a question quickly come in from Jocelyn saying, are the percentage figures on your presentation European standards, or are they consistent with what's observed in the US, Canada?
There is a mix. There are some of them that are more North American centric, some of them that are very UK centric. So we would have to look at stats per stats if I wanted to give you a specific answer here.
Okay. So going on to the actual tips and everything, so we've had quite a few bits coming in. So Angel's asked, how do you handle survey follow-up or closed loop feedback? Do you offer the customers an option to further discuss the feedback? If so, who handles it? Julien, I don't know whether you wanted to take that one.
Well, that's really that really once again depends on the type of business you're in. I'm not sure it's necessary for it really depends on the type of feedback you get. That doesn't make sense for every type of feedback. That does not make sense for every type of company either. Having the technology out there is one thing, but does it make sense for my business is really a question that each business needs to ask itself.
Okay, thank you. So we've had an opinion sent in from Sven who said it's important to have a good CRM in place to store the whole journey of your customers in their account, independent if they call, send an email or message with you. So Nicholas has sent in a tip saying you need to ensure your survey program is sensitive to customers' culture. We found out our customers from Japan don't like to be reminded. Thus, we turned off the survey reminders for those customers and saw that our CSAT increased for that region. Richard, I don't know what your thoughts are on that one.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Yeah, just being aware of cultural sensitivities around that. I would probably suggest the Japanese example is quite an extreme example, but it's still a valid one to bear in mind.
Yeah, I think it can also apply to things like, I know that a lot of cultures have number sensitivity and colours and things like that for good and bad luck. So it's just being aware of those sorts of things. So Claire's had a tip which says hold daily huddles to allow tips or feedback to be passed around to everyone. This can then be taken and used that day and manage customer satisfaction even better. Scott said, do you have any magical formula to measure FCR? Julien, I don't know whether you have that one.
No. Unfortunately, there is no magical formula, and you need to be, actually, FCR is incredibly important, but you have to think it through once you set it up. And the reason for that is what you define as a conversation is very clear and simple over the phone. When it comes to email, that's way more complex. When it comes to messaging, it's way more complex. When it comes to social, it's way more complex because phone conversation, it has a clear start and a clear end. So there is no magical formula. You really have to look at what your business looks like, what are the channels you have in place, and see what makes sense for yourself. Once again, since you're going to use this KPI over and over again in a consistent manner, once you have this formula, it's going to work for you in the long run, but spend some time figuring it out for yourself.
Thank you. So Eva said, a simple drive for us focuses on real-time interaction and engagement with customers on the back of both positive and negative feedback. We find customers really appreciate when we take the time to understand and evaluate customer feedback or concerns. On top of this, we found a simple acknowledgement can really boost overall satisfaction. So Nicholas has said, we send an initial invitation immediately after case closure, then reminders at 5 and 9 days later. We have a toxicity rule that guarantee a customer won't be invited to a survey more than once in a 21-day period. Richard, I don't know if you've heard about this rule?
Yeah, survey overkill is massive. And it's been that way for years, and it's just a way of avoiding survey overkill. The problem is that everybody wants customer feedback these days, whether it be email, whether it be telephone, whether it be SMS. But no, that's a sensible approach.
Thank you. So we've had a question in from Scott, who asked, what are the best ways to increase the volume of completed surveys? Julien, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this?
Well, the first thing to make sure that your customers are completing your surveys is to make sure that the survey is directly related to their own experience. Sending random surveys, you're never going to get great feedback. Sending a survey immediately after an interaction that is somehow related to the topic that they had, you're going to have much better feedback. I need to feel concerned. I need to relate to what you're asking me. Otherwise, I'm just not going to waste my time on your survey.
Yeah. And Richard, I don't know whether you had any thoughts on this one.
Yeah, that's a great point that Julian's made. Make it relevant to the individual. Survey design, there's another webinar for you there, Rachel. Survey design is quite a big area, but make it relevant, make it short, make it concise. There's some simple design tips.
Brilliant.
And reminders as well. Reminders work very well.
Thank you very much, both. So we've had a tip in from Sven who said, our customers can choose whether they like to be contacted again about the given case. Only a few do so, but you can turn a bad experience into a good one by this. Nicholas has said, I would recommend contact all our customers who give you anything below an ideal rating. Our scale is 0 to 10, and we review all surveys who score us below a 9, because of that, I believe, our survey response rate is hovering around 24%. So Susie said, analyse your CSAT scores against your quality scores to ensure that your scorecards are targeting the right behaviours. Richard, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Quality monitoring, yeah, good practice. And again, the alignment between the two is really important as well.
Yeah. So we've had a question in from Scott saying, could you tell me more about the traditional and new customer communication preferences? Are there age bands associated with certain communication preferences? Julien, I don't know whether you...
Yeah, so that's referring to the third or fourth slide of my presentation where we talk about traditional versus new age consumers. That's really much about the age. Yes, it's not showing on the graph, but we are analyzing people from the age of 15 to the age of 65 plus. And what you see is basically, obviously, the younger the generation, the more people are using digital. What is very interesting from this graph is that you see that even generation 50 and above and beyond are actually using digital quite a bit nowadays as well. So it becomes important across the board.
Yeah. And Richard, do you see kind of communication preferences with age bands? Yeah,
there is, and there always has been, going back even sort of the last 10 years. But yeah, it's a great point Julie made. Even me as a 40-something, if I can't get a response by email, I'll jump on Twitter. jump on, you know, company Facebook page. So that's the more difficult thing, I think, to track, is when customers jump.
Yep. So we've had a tip sent in from Sarah, who said, we use our team managers, area managers, to phone customers back. We then collate the feedback from those calls centrally to solve the original problem, but also to aid and inform our continuous improvement. So Nicholas has sent in a tip saying, we don't have the agents contact the customer, unless it's clear that they did everything correctly. Instead, the supervisor or team lead is the one who contacts the customer. Got there eventually. So Sarah said, we use CSAT scores in agent one-to-ones so that there's a vested interest for everyone within the organisation. Linking it with agent tenure goes a step further, which is brilliant. So Jocelyn said, has anyone got any recommended online tools to conduct good surveys? Julien, would you like to?
Yeah, well, that's a tough question, because obviously at Ring Central we offer survey as part of the standard package, regardless any channel you need. The only limitation when it comes to survey is you can't do survey on public channels. So Facebook when it's public, Twitter when it's public, you will have to move the customer to something private, obviously. But beside this, you should have survey going out on every single channel, regardless the channel. You need to have a survey to have a complete overview of everything happening. So the only great survey tool I can suggest today would be Ring Central, but happy to hear about others.
So we've had a final tip in from Nicholas, who said, we found that it's important to have a close relationship between the quality and CSAT, as intelligence from the surveys can be used to drive what quality is looking for. I have weekly one-to-ones with the quality manager. Richard, I don't know what your thoughts are on that final tip.
Yeah, it's a great tip, and it's come up, that link between customer satisfaction and quality has come up 3-4 times now in this sort of latter section of the webinar today. So yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense.
Fab, and unfortunately we're reaching the top of the hour, so we have our own survey that we like to share with everyone. So in the chat room, in 1 or 2 words, could you just write, what did you like best about today's webinar? And today's winning tip is from Amy, who said, if you give your advisors autonomy to solve the customer's problem firsthand and not have to escalate further up the ladder, this will give the customers a feel of accountability from one person and resolve their issue first time. Therefore, even if the customer has a problem, the journey will hopefully be swift and smooth, resulting in a satisfied customer. So well done, Amy. We'll be in touch after the webinar. And there will be a post-webinar survey, so if you could fill that in, we love to hear your feedback. Just a reminder, we have taken a replay. It will be available in about an hour's time on this link, so yep, you're more than welcome to share that with your teams. We'll be back next week with our webinar on Wednesday, which is on the best ways to use AI in the contact centre. But I'd just like to say thank you very much to our 2 speakers for today. To Richard Kimber, the Customer Experience Coach, thank you very much for all your insights and everything.
More than welcome, Rachel. Thank you for having me.
And Julien Rio from Ring Central, thank you very much as well for your detailed information.
Thank you. Happy to come back anytime.
Brilliant. And thank you from myself as well. And we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you. Bye.
That's great. Thanks, Rachel. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.